Thank you very much, Professor Rangila ji. Namaskar to everybody. I will be just talking to you, not lecturing to you. And my topic for talk is semiotics of Indian knowledge traditions. You have been given very good understanding and knowledge about the methodology of semiotics by learned speakers before me. So I don't go into the methodology or definition or anything else connected with the discipline of semiotics itself. But to begin with, what do I understand about semiotics? I must share my own views regarding this discipline and how it can be used in our interpretations of our texts. Those texts can be texts of literature, culture, or knowledge. So I am reminded of a very good saying about the world we are living these days. It is about human life itself. Somebody says that on this planet, man has engaged in two practices, just two practices only. One is material social practice, in which he tries to earn for his living, which is a very important thing, most important thing in man's life. But the other practice, which is equally important, that practice is semiotic practice. It means, what do we make of the world in which we live? What do we understand about ourselves, about surrounding nature, culture, society, and cosmos in which we live? We have to live and have our being. Now, these two practices are complementary to each other. Man cannot just live by bread alone. He has to know what he does. So when in the first definition given by a philosopher in ancient Greek by Aristotle, what is man? He faced this fundamental question. And he replied, man is a social being. It means man, he said, man is a social animal. So this is a way of defining. In this definition, there is a definition of definition itself. How we define things. First of all, whatever we have to define, we relate it with the wider perspective. In the case of man, it is animal existence on this planet. He equates man with the animal first and then differentiates. This is what we do with definitions. And the defining characteristics of man is his sociality. In being social, he becomes man, apart from the animals. But nowadays, this definition has been further refined, and the most refinement was given by modern thinker Susan K. Langer, Ernst Cassirer. They defined man as animal symbolicum. Man is an animal which creates and uses symbols. This is going one step further than that. And here we enter into the realm of semiotics. So, semiotics, as you know, is a discipline modeled on linguistics. So, Seussian structural linguistics is a model provided for this, the creation and awareness of this new discipline in human knowledge, while creating a science of language. Because before Saussure, the linguistic study was confined to comparative studies of language or the historical study of languages. No doubt these two areas relating to linguistics are very important. They have given opportunity to Max Muller-like thinkers to project an idea of the family of languages, family of speeches. So, but the contribution of Saussure is that he tried to construct a scientific model of language. And while working on it, he came upon an idea of a greater discipline than linguistics, which is semiotics. And then it means that any type or every type of cultural behavior practice can be studied from the angle of semiotics. So this is my understanding. Why it is useful? Because as I have taken Indian knowledge traditions, I just want to share with you what do I mean by Indian knowledge traditions. Perchance, I was involved in a course making for CBSE's 11th and 12th class. It is on the website. The paper that we, elective paper that we devised, a team of scholars, I was made the convener of that course committee. It was named as Indian Knowledge Traditions and Practices. But while it was being considered by the board's bigger authority, they called us to explain the significance of why should we take this course and teach it to our students. They put me question, what is the need of this question, this paper? And I was baffled. I counter questioned the person who asked me, why should we not teach this? After all, in our country, which has been liberated long time back, 65 years back, why should our students not know what knowledge systems have been produced here in this land? So ultimately they agreed on one condition. They said, you please change the name of the course, then it will. So what they suggested? They suggested you, instead of Indian knowledge traditions, to name it as Knowledge Traditions and Practices of India. I asked them, what is the logic? They said the logic is that the Indian knowledge tradition can be misinterpreted and it can be objected by the minority communities. So I said, okay. So that now that course has been Knowledge Traditions and Practices of India. While working on that course, we have made 20 units for the benefit of 11th and 12th class. You can look at those units. We came to know, surprisingly, because I have been a teacher of Punjabi language, literature and culture for the last 50 years. I didn't know what domain, what our intellectuals, our rishis, our thinkers have produced in various domains of knowledge. It is only after a year of exercise working on that course we came to know there are enormous things that our ancient ancestors have done in the field of knowledge. So this is my entry into this subject, but I will confine myself only to the one aspect of Indian knowledge tradition, that is its dharma traditions. There are other domains of knowledge like grammar, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, poetics, philosophy, religion, dance, many other domains, but I have decided to restrict myself only to the dharma traditions. Why? I think that our civilization, our knowledge traditions are part of a bigger civilization, which we can say Indic civilization. And Indic civilization is knowledge and dharma centered. Dharma is the core component of our civilization, great civilization, for which I am reminded of one of our Urdu poet who has written Taranai Hindi, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. He has written Sare Jahan se Acha Hindustan Hamara. And at one place he says, कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी, सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे ज़मां हमारा. What does it mean? He says that there is something in our civilization which does not die, has not died. Otherwise, we have been facing challenges from the many centuries. So that civilization, the knowledge of that civilization is based on its dharma traditions, and there are 4 dharma traditions in our this great ancient and living civilization, which I call Indic civilization. And they are Sanatan Dharma, Jainism, Buddhism and Sikhism. These 4 dharma traditions are part of one global overarching civilization. Why study civilizations? The immediate challenge and awareness of civilizational studies has been risen recently before 2 decades ago. An American social scientist, Samuel Huntington, you may be knowing, he presented a very challenging thesis for the future world. After the demise of Soviet Union, he said, now there is going to be a clash of civilizations. And unfortunately, that clash has materialized in our present globalized world. We are facing global terrorism, fundamentalism, and all these activities are rightly or wrongly connected with religions. And we are facing grave challenges, and those challenges are only account of our misunderstanding or disunderstanding of religion as a phenomenon. Because from the very beginning of modernism, we have neglected a very important field of our activity, that is religion. As you know, modernism projects a model for human progress, emancipatory project, It means the thinkers of modernism, they presented a thesis that man should be saved from ignorance, superstition, dogmas. And what are the causes of these things? This is myth, metaphysics, superstition, and religion. Religion was clubbed together with other forces of ignorance, and unfortunately, the scientific study of religion was marginalized. And we are facing these challenges only account of this fact that modernism, which was enlightening period of enlightenment for humanity, it turned out a black hole from one important area of knowledge, that is religion. But this area has been again taken up by postmodern thinking. The developments in the modern thought, I am reminded of one very interesting statement by Freud. Freud was a psychologist. When talking of religion, what does he say? It's a very interesting thing. He was delivering a lecture to the audience, select audience. He said, "Gentlemen, I have come to shake you out of your seats, what I am going to say. And this is the religion is superstition. It is only, the God is only father figure of man, nothing else. Religion is a manifestation of fear, insecurity." This is what he said. So that phase has now passed. Now we know in the field of anthropology and sociology especially, people have tried to again understand the phenomenon of religion, and they have come to conclusion that religion belongs to the awareness of man from the subconscious levels of mind. It is the subconscious or the mostly unconscious mind that creates structures of religion. Like my friend Narayan was talking about shaman. Shaman belongs to the field of religion. He operates from the unconscious area of mind. But the main findings of the postmodern thinkings are, they have tried to understand about the function of religion. What does religion do? There are three things to understand a phenomenon, a behavior of man. One is the system, the other is structure. The system is whole. One aspect of every phenomenon is structure, the other is function. And when we come to the function of religion, postmodern thinkers have said that religion is a concern for final meaning in life. And as Arnold Toynbee has said, religion is the search for final meaning. And another thinker from the side of religion, he is Paul Tillich. He has written Systematic Theology, and he has defined religion as man's ultimate concern. So two things have been used by these thinkers. One is finality, final meaning in life. When we search for the final meaning, we enter the area of religion. And when we explore human concerns, we come to the ultimate concern of human being. What is the ultimate concern? Other concerns are penultimate. Lower concerns, But one concern, it is ultimate global concern, then we come to the area of religion. Now this is the field of religion you should keep in mind when trying to interpret religious behavior, Indian knowledge traditions, Indian dharma traditions in mind from the semiotic point of view. If we are to understand the semiotics of our civilization, so we have to keep these things in mind, that we are concerned with an area of knowledge and experience which has finality and ultimateness over it. Now, when Samuel Huntington was talking about the clash of civilizations, he referred to things specifically. He said the clash will be between the Western Christianity and resurgent Islam especially. That was his view, which has become quite true these days. But surprisingly, when we take civilizations in a mind, we see that he committed a grave mistake. Christianity and Islam belong to the one civilization. They do not belong to other civilizations. They are part of one civilization which previously was called Semitic civilization, but Semitic word is racial. So nowadays there is a fashion or tendency to define the civilizations in non-racial terms. And from that angle, both Christianity and Islam, as well as the ancient Judaism also, three religions, they belong to one world civilization which can be termed as Abrahamic civilization. Abraham is the forefather of these three religious communities, considered to be the forefather of these three communities. In the similar vein, Indic civilization has four components, and now when we try to understand the semiotic configuration of these two civilizations and their religious traditions, we have to look into the structure of their thinking. Interestingly, these two global civilizations, there are other civilizations also, like the very great Chinese civilization, alongside these two civilizations. But these two civilizations, the Abrahamic and the Vedic civilization or Indic civilization, their prime signs, signifiers are different. From the semiotic point of view, we get to one important insight when we study their total religious or dharma traditions. We come to understand that the Abrahamic civilization is monotheistic, believing in one supreme God, one supreme transcendent God, which can be termed as God, Yahweh, Allah, Khuda. These are the names given to that one transcendent being which creates and controls this creation according to their conceptual framework. And if we come to Indic civilization, we have one prime signifier, that is the Brahma. Brahma is prime signifier of Indic civilization, and its ideas contained in our most ancient text, that is Rig Veda. So, what is the different? What difference does it make if we call that reality as Allah or Brahma? It makes different. It makes different conceptually, because Brahma is conceptually different from the concept of God. Brahma cannot be equated with God, because what is Brahma? Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahm. These are the definitions that our rishis have given to the idea of Brahma, which is a prime symbol of our civilization. And it makes a great difference. So we have to understand, being Indian people, we have to understand how do our people visualize this cosmos, this nature, human life, and everything else. And Brahm, the difference between God and Brahm is that Brahm is all pervading. It is not outside, it is not transcendent, it is immanent in reality, immanent in nature, immanent in cosmos. This comes to a very scientific perception of reality. So when we say that all this is Brahma, it means we do not have to believe in the existence of Brahma, because it is already within us and without us. You have to believe in a God which is transcendent. If you don't believe, you will not benefit. If you have first to believe in the existence of that God. But in case of Brahma, this is not the case. Because when we say that Brahma is what is, everything is there. Whatever is Brahma. And our philosophers and our thinkers have explained the creation of reality relating to that concept, idea of Brahma, by giving it a meaning that there are two stages of Brahma. One is the absolute stage, which is Nirguna Brahma. Nirguna means without qualities, when there is no creation. And when there is no creation, this is wonderfully explained in Rig Veda 10th Mandal. Interestingly, our sacred books are neither books nor sacred. This has been suggested by one of the Danish scholars who worked on Vedas. His book is Rediscovering the Vedas. The name of the author, I suggest you to read that book. It's a very excellent book. This is Fritz Stahl, F-R-I-T-S, Fritz Stahl, S-T-A-A-L. Fritz Stahl has written this book, Rediscovering Vedas. A foreign scholar. Mostly we have been our heritage has been rediscovered by foreign people, not by us. And he first of all, he studied Sanskrit, went to the Pandits, and he studied the archaeological evidence of Sindhu, Saraswati civilization, and then he came to the conclusion that our texts are entirely different from the religious texts of Abrahamic civilization. First of all, he said, we consider our religious texts not as sacred in the sense of the Abrahamic, like Quran and Bible in particular. They are considered to be given by God Himself. But our texts are knowledge texts, primarily, secondarily. They have been created by the meditative vision of the rishis who meditated on this phenomenon, cosmos, and composed suktas. In Rig Veda you will find not verses, not poetic lines, but they are called suktas. What is sukta? Sukta means, ukta means a statement. Sukta means nice statement. The composition of the Vedas is through the medium of language which works differently. So they are meditative vision, poetic vision of the rishis, and what they have done, they have tried to explain this phenomena, human being and social sphere. I was talking about the Nasadiya Sukta, which is the dawn of philosophical thinking in Indian philosophy. And what does it say? It's very interesting. Nasadiya Sukta is a very interesting piece of text for analysis. It says, Na sadasino sadasi tadani nasid rajono vayoma paroyatah. You see, in the beginning there was neither being nor non-being, neither this world nor that sky above. What was there? He also said, Na mrityu asit amritam na tarhi. There was neither death nor immortality. I do not remember the whole of the sukta, but the important thing when he comes to, after this categorizing of the nature and its forces, he comes to Anit Vatam Swadhyaya Tad Ekam. Then, when there was no non-being and no life and no death, there was only one thing. There was one. Swadhyaya, it means that one dependent on itself. So that one has been translated as Brahma. Brahma means the one total principle of being and existence which is all pervading in this world. So our great thinkers, we have built 6 systems of orthodox philosophy, and then we have Charvaka philosophy, which is called also Lokayata, and Jaina, and Buddhist philosophy. We have multiple systems of philosophical thinking, and the central point is that we conceptualize this cosmos as one all-pervading existence. And Shankaracharya, writing in Vivek Chudamani, he summarizes into one couplet all this thinking about cosmos, world, and human being. These are the parameters in which we understand life, human life and existence. He says, Brahm Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmev Napara. Means Brahma is the only reality which is in itself, and the Jagat, the created world, is Mithya. It means it has been made. It is not true like the ultimate reality. It has its reality as a created reality. And the last thing is Jiva Brahmev Napara. The Jiva is Brahma and nothing else. It means we consider in this word, that the word used is jiva, not man. Our Shankaracharya uses the word jiva. Jiva means all beings. All beings participate in Brahma. It has great significance for us in our behavior towards the other beings. So this is the final dream of our civilization and construction of reality which guides us. It has given us a very few important insights for living. You know, what do we do when we philosophize? Philosophy has two dimensions in life. One is the world view. World view is the total vision of reality. The other is a way of life. How we conceive this cosmos and human being affects our day-to-day living. For instance, when Samuel Huntington was talking of the clash of civilizations, he came to the conclusion that these two components will clash with each other. Why? That is important. He also explained, he gave the reason why they will clash. They said both of these religions are proselytizing religions. And they believe that they have that the truth is only their property. The truth is only their property. The other people who do not belong to their complex, they are either ignorant or they are kafir, non-believers. So they can be done away with. But this is not the case in our civilization. Rig Veda, our primary text, it defines reality. It says, Ekam sad vipra bahuda vadanti. The truth is one, but the learned give it many names. This small statement has enormous significance in the present day context also. When we deal with others, what should be our model? Our rishis say that truth is not our exclusive property. Truth is one, but we can call it by many names. There are many different ways, approaches to that truth. So we are pluralistic in our vision as regards the religious traditions concerned. We can enter into a dialogue with other rather than fighting with the other. And this has been substantiated in our primary Indian knowledge text, which I call Rig Veda. So my first premises is, when we understand our Indian knowledge tradition, we first of all explore what we have in mind, what we have the vision of reality, and what are the ideas of living contained in it. The other thing that gives a place to clash is about the image of the other. What do we think of the other? There are only two ways. There are two attitudes towards others. One idea or attitude is, we consider other person as enemy. The other idea is to consider the other person as friend. In Yajurveda, this insight has been stated very emphatically. In Yajurveda it is said, Mitrasya ma chakshusha sarvani bhutani. I look towards all the beings, other persons, with the eye of a friend. It means we treat the other person as a friend. And when we study Buddhism, the prime virtues contained in Buddhist thought, one is compassion, the other is Maitri, Karuna and Maitri. Maitri means friendship. In Sikh religion, by the way, the Sikh scripture is not the composition of Sikh gurus only. Sikh gurus are only 5 or 6 whose writings are contained in that big book. And others are medieval bhaktas like Kabir, Namdev, Jayadev. And they are part of that sacred book. And what does our sacred book, Guru Granth, says? Having a dialogue with that Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, Guru Nanak says, Eka Surati Jete hai ji. There is only one consciousness, however the jeeves are there in the world, the consciousness is one. Eka Surati, Surati means consciousness. Jete hai ji. जीव, जितने जीव हैं, एक ही कॉन्शियसनेस है, एक ही चेतना है. सुरति विहूणा कोई न की. Nobody has been created without consciousness. And then in the last sentence it says, Jehi surati teha tin rah. Whatever we have the consciousness, we choose our way of life according to that. It means we believe in the plurality of approaches toward one truth. This is the discourse of knowledge, beginning from Rig Veda, coming through Jainism, Buddhism and Sikhism. Jainism, there is a philosophy of life which is called Syadavad. Syadavad, what does it mean? Syadavad means Syad Asti, Syad Nasti. It means perhaps this all world exists. Syad Nasti, and perhaps it does not exist. Syad Asti Cha Nasti. It's a very strange way of, it's a very paradoxical way of understanding the reality in Jain thought. But it comes to that one theme, which is plurality. It means it emphasizes that there are multiple ways to one reality. So we need not fight over our ways and means. In our civilization, the dharma is one. Panths are different. There are different mats and panth. What is panth? Panth means way of life. There is a multiplicity of ways of life, and our theorizing matas are different, panthas are different, but dharma is same. And what is dharma? Dharma has been defined as dharyate iti dharma. Dharma is what sustains human life, social order, cosmic order. In Rig Veda, there is no concept of dharma. There is concept of rhythm. Rhythm is a universal principle which pervades in this universe. It controls. It is an idea of order in life. You know, when in Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan Krishna says, yada yada hi dharmasya glanirabhavati. Whenever there is a disruption in the order in life, then there is intervention of the divine intervention. Dharma sanstapana arthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. This is our racial memory. This is our belief in that whenever there is disruption, disorder in life, something happens. So, dharma is the core component of our looking at reality, human life. And it has been beautifully elaborated in one of our philosophical systems. In Vaisheshika, I don't exactly remember, Vaisheshik Sutra, it has been defined as Yat abhyodaya nishreyas siddhiya sa dharma. What is dharma? He says, with the help of which we contain prosperity in life as well as moksha in life, that is dharma. And in Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Arjan Dev says, Sarva dharma mein hai shreshth dharm, Hari ko naam jap nirmal karam. So there is a unity in our thought. There is a unity of our global vision of reality. But unfortunately, we have forgotten our own tradition. Professor Rangila was teaching you, the other day I heard him, about Panini. I give you one quotation from Patanjali, and other third person is. There are three grammarians, you may be better knowing, I sometimes forget, being my age, I am nearing 80 years now. Patanjali, Panini, Patanjali, and other one, yeah? Bhartrihari. Bhartrihari has said one beautiful thing. Actually, we are in the habit of quoting Western authors and not our own, which are very important. They have given very important. He says, one who knows only about his own tradition does not know about even his own tradition. Very beautiful thing. It means in order to understand and appreciate your own tradition, you have to look beyond yourself, beyond your own tradition. Because in comparison with the other traditions, you appreciate your own traditions. But unfortunately, we have come to this sad conclusion. We know the other traditions very well, but not our own tradition. We are mostly ignorant of our own traditions. So this is our predicament. Now, I think there should be a renaissance in our thinking. We should know, understand, and appreciate what our forefathers, our rishis and thinkers, philosophers, poets have given wisdom, light of wisdom to us. So in that light, I want to emphasize only one thing. From the point of view of semiotics, it's a large area. I cannot teach within the sphere of 1 hour or 2 hours. It will take very long time of deep understanding and study. Fortunately for us, there is lot of material contained in internet. On the internet, you will find very, very long list of articles where you can enrich your thinking about Indian civilization, Indian knowledge traditions, Indian dharma traditions. So, I only can create an interest in our own tradition of knowledge which is very relevant not only for us but for the total mankind, which is struggling with this global terrorism. And because terrorism is not the real religion, it is the misuse of religion, politicalization of religion. You know, every religion begins with a prophetic thought. Prophets are the originators, avatars are the originators, rishis are the originators of any religion, any dharma. But then historically there comes a period when dharmas and religions go into the hands of priests. The priests have their own interests. The priestly class, what do they do to religion? They dilute the message and essence of religion according to their economic interests. So, in the hands of preachers, priests, the religion is demoralized, degraded, not demoralized, degraded to one degree. And there is then this third stage which we are passing these days. Religion comes into the hands of politicians, and politicians are hungry of power hungry people. They do not know, they need not know what is religion. They only use religion for their own benefits. And we have to suffer on account of this politicizing of religion. So when we come to the semiotic understanding of religion itself or dharma itself, we have to take care that we have to understand the structure and function of religion from a multidisciplinary approach towards it. If we study religion from inside, you come to another conclusion. But if you study religions from outside, only then you can learn what religion has given humanity. Religion has honestly humanized man. Without religion, man would have been blind. But without science, he would have been lame. Science has its own function in life, and religion has its own. So we have to understand the phenomenon of religions, especially in our present context. We have to understand the structure and function of our knowledge systems and of our dharma traditions. Dharma traditions are basically a matter of beliefs and practices for the common people. When we worship in our individual capacity, we have another attitude towards religion. But when we study religion, when we try to know what we are doing, only then we come to proper understanding of religion, of dharma. And that understanding can be enriched by applying the models developed in this discipline which we call semiotics. So I conclude with these words. I have given only just one thing. If I am fortunate, if I have been able to clear one insight, that we have to understand our civilization and its cultural creations, productions in the name of or in the form of dharma traditions. So we have to interpret them, study them from the perspective of semiotics, We have to study them as science systems and their function in life.